Shoujo anime is a really solid demographic. Most of the anime in this demographic are romance series, however, not every series. These series do a really good job at showing off strong female leads who can help empower the girls and young women who are the target demographic for these stories. Today I thought, why not rank my 10 favorite shoujo series and give my thoughts on them. This list will be pretty generic, but honestly, these series really are just some of the best this demographic has to offer. But before we get started ranking these series, I would like it if you guys could leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It would help out a ton. My goal this year is to hit 1,000 subs, and it would be awesome if you could help achieve that. Plus, you get awesome content every week from me, so you won't be missing out on anime videos to watch. Anyway, let's get ranking these series. So, in the lowest spot on this list, we have Orin High School Host Club. Now, hear me out. This anime is hilarious, however, it isn't its only strength. But I will talk about that in a bit, as I do actually want to talk about the comedy. This series uses its character interactions to make for some absolutely hilarious moments. The characters always find a way to get themselves into some really stupid moments that had me laughing so hard when I watched this series. Now, on the counter to that, this series also does drama insanely well. This series is mostly a comedy, so when it switches to more serious moments, you can immediately feel the shift, and with how good the writing in the series is, you are able to feel for these characters and what they are going through. This series knew exactly the right times to make the switch as well, plus the series does a really good job at still adding in comedic moments during the more serious episodes to try and make the mood a little bit better. The soundtrack in this series is decent. Honestly, I don't remember too many tracks from it, but I do remember liking most of the music in this series. This series is pretty old now, but the animation is still really fluid. It is definitely aged, but it's not bad at all, and definitely still holds up even if it still is a little bit aged. Alright, now to talk about the best part of this series, the characters. The character writing in this series is actually really good. The dynamic between all the characters works really well. You can definitely tell that everyone is genuinely friends with each other. Haruhi being the only female character in the main group doesn't throw off the dynamic either, it actually enhances it. Obviously, this anime is a reverse harem, so a lot of the guys fall for her during this series, but that makes for a really good dynamic that is explored in this series. Can a friendship hold up if you all like the same person? Which this series goes and it says it can. There is one thing in the series that is not aged very well at all, but if you ignore it or take it for what it is and a joke, then it honestly isn't too bad. But let's just say some of the jokes are very distasteful in a more modern sense, but if you ignore them, then this series is still a really good watch that I actually recommend you check out. Alright, so next up on this list is an anime that might surprise some people, but it's Natsume's Book of Friends, or Natsume Yujincho. This series is a really good supernatural mystery series. Getting to learn more about all the different ayakashi in Japanese folklore and seeing them in action is quite cool. The world building in this series is immaculate as well. This series does a really good job at setting things up and making the future of the story really good. This series spans so many different eras of anime through its almost 7 seasons, an OVA, and 2 movies. Through that time, the animation has been pretty solid. The older seasons are definitely a little dated, but honestly, they still look pretty good. Nothing insane, but they look fairly good. The soundtrack for this anime is insane though. The music really sets the tone for this series so well. We get music that makes the supernatural stuff hit or the emotional stuff feel really hard. The music does a really good job at conveying what it needs to convey through its sound. The character writing in this series is really good. Natsume's Book of Friends is mostly an episodic series with an overarching story centered around the episodic nature of the show. However, this show does a really good job at making each and every character feel like a real person. Natsume himself is a great character who we get to see a lot of growth from throughout the series. We also get to see his friends aid other people who can see or sense spirits. Most of them are characters you don't really want to fuck with. Now, to the Ayakashi themselves. They are pretty interesting characters, Nyanko-sensei being the most prominent and the best character. He provides a lot of comedic relief for the mostly serious nature of the show, so he is definitely a breath of fresh air in the series. There are other Ayakashi characters who are also close to Natsume who also have really good personalities. This show does a really good job at showing the balance between having human connections and having a connection to the spirits. This anime tries to make you think at the beginning that one of those things is better than the other. But as time goes on, we see that being able to befriend both is exactly how people who can see and sense spirits should live instead of constantly hunting down spirits like they currently do. This series is really incredible. If you have yet to check this series out, I recommend it. It is long, but it is well worth it once you sit through it all. One of the first series that I watched that got me addicted to a specific genre of story is My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom, or Villainess for short. This series is so good, it got me to want to explore more series of a similar genre, and I have loved those types of stories ever since. Villainess is a hilarious anime with some really unhinged comedy. This series never fails to get a laugh out of me, which is a really big draw of this series. This series doesn't really have that many serious moments, which isn't a bad thing. This series still handles its characters really well. All of the characters play really well into their roles. Katarina is the perfect main character for this story. She is just the right amount of stupid that it isn't cringe and that she can still handle herself. She is mostly just dense and can't really read a room. And the rest of the main cast kinda just plays to her every whim. This series is a pseudo-harem series. It isn't really a harem series and more so makes fun of the tropes of most harem series. The series also has an LGBT character in it, which is really nice and actually makes for a lot of comedy even more funny as she constantly gets jealous over the guys. The animation in this anime leaves much to be desired, especially for the time frame it came out in. It's not necessarily bad, but it could definitely be better. The soundtrack is also middle of the road. It does have some tracks that are pretty good, but for the most part, I don't really remember much of the soundtrack for this anime. However, don't let those last two things detract you from watching this series, as there are a lot of really good things that can come from watching this series, as it is really just an entertaining watch. Alright, next on the list I have brought up in passing in a few videos, but I've never really talked about in detail, and that series is Kamisama Kiss. This series is just good. It is another supernatural style show, although it isn't as dark as Nas Book of Friends. This series is about a girl running a shrine and having to deal with Ayakashi and spirits while falling in love with the familiar who serves her. And honestly, this series is great. Firstly, the animation. Honestly, this series is 12 years old and still looks really good. Is it the best animation ever? No, but the animation is still good and still holds up today. There's a good mix of action and romance in this series that it makes the whole show a rollercoaster of emotions. This series doesn't really let off the gas from the moment it gets going, and that makes for some really good anime. The soundtrack in this anime is pretty decent as well. I remember really liking the openings for this anime, but besides those, there were some other really good tracks played in the background of this anime. The best part of this anime, without giving any spoilers to the story, is the characters. They are so well written. Nanami is such a good main character. This is the first time on this list where we're seeing a badass female character who can take care of herself, but still knows how to rely on other people for help when need be. Her interaction with all the other characters is great, as she is learning of this world at the same time and way that we are, and we get to see things for the first time together. It makes her growing connection to some of the spirits and Ayakashi feel very genuine and makes them really feel like friends. Tomoe especially is a really good male lead to this story and is here to protect Nanami from her recklessness. He is also kinda just a badass. He is an extremely powerful familiar. He has his own problems that have to be resolved in this series, which make him a really complex character to explore. Kamisama Kiss is up there with some of the best shoujo anime for sure, simply for its great storytelling, awesome characters, and great world building. Now, this next series is pretty popular, and for good reason, because it's good. Snow White with the red hair is just a really good series. This series also has another main character who is strong-willed and can handle herself, however, she does know how to rely on others. This series has some really insane world building, which I actually think is its biggest strength. Sure, there are other great elements of this series, but the way this series is able to explain the world, its different kingdoms, their relationships with each other, and all other aspects this series explains is actually insane. We get to learn so much about this world without it being boring, which is great. When it comes to the animation is decent. It's not anything amazing, but it's okay. There are some scenes in the anime that look really good though, which makes those scenes way better. I honestly don't really remember much of the soundtrack, but I do remember it being pretty decent. Another aspect that really shines through in this anime is the romance between the two main characters. Huh, threw you for a curveball there. You thought I was going to say the characters themselves. The romance between the two is just super wholesome. It makes for some of the best moments in this series. Just seeing those two interact with each other is honestly the highlight of the series for me. Now, to actually talk about the characters. They are a strong aspect of this series. All of them, including the side cast, are well written and interesting characters. All of them have depth that make them really interesting to explore and learn more about. The interactions between all the characters is also nice, as before we learn anything about the characters' relationships, we can guess it by the way they interact with each other, which is a massive strong point to this series. Snow White with the red hair is a really good series that has a lot of really strong aspects to it that make this series really good if you have not watched the series. First off, what the hell have you been doing? And secondly, watch it. It's good. Alright, so this next one is a traditional rom-com, but in my opinion, it is one of the best. This series is lovely complex. This series was really funny and had me laughing out loud a lot. It actually does have a really unique concept for the storyline as well, making the two characters' heights the focus of their conflict and their insecurities. The comedy duo of the two main characters is actually insane, but besides the comedy, the series does a really good job at having some more serious moments in there. Not too many to take away from the comedy, but enough that it actually gets you to care for the characters as more time passes in this series. The animation in this series is aged for sure. It's not bad for the time, but you can definitely tell this series is older than most. The soundtrack wasn't anything insane either. There's like one song that I like, maybe two. The rest are just kinda mid. But that's okay, because music isn't the main focus of most anime, especially a slice of life romance series. The characters though, now they're good. The interactions between all the characters is great and leads to some really good comedic moments as well as some pretty emotional moments. Risa makes for a really good main character. She is very strong-willed, however, that mostly stems from her trying to hide her insecurities. Atsushi is a good male lead, and he is able to make Risa open up even if he doesn't intend to. These two often get into fights throughout the series, which weirdly helps them grow closer to each other as the series goes on. Both of them help each other to be better people and learn to trust others, which is nice. The side cast in this anime is also pretty good. We get to see the friends of both Risa and Atsushi, and they are pretty decent as well. This series does mostly focus on Risa and Atsushi, so we don't get to see them develop as much throughout the series, but they still do have fun personalities. Lovely Complex is an anime that you expect to be a pretty generic romance story as you go into it, but as you come out of it, you realize that this series has so much more to offer than just a generic romance story. Alright, so this next one is a series that I like the manga for way more than the anime, but the anime is still really good. This series is Kaichiwa Maid Sama. This series is one of the best rom-coms I have ever read or watched. There is so much good about this series. Let's start by talking about the comedy of this series. It is really good. There are so many characters that are just hilarious and make for some really entertaining moments. But the more serious moments in this series are actually what make this series so good. The series can switch on a dime and it still does a really good job at keeping the series lighthearted by keeping some of the comedic moments even during the more serious parts of the story. The animation in this series is pretty good for the time that it came out in, and honestly, it still looks fairly decent today. It is certainly aged like with most other series I've talked about today, but it is still decent. The soundtrack is decent for this series. The opening especially is really good, but the rest of the soundtrack is pretty decent. Not anything amazing, but fairly decent. The characters to me are the highlight of this series. Misaki is such a good protagonist for this story. Like with a lot of series today, she is a very strong-willed character. She is also very hardworking. She is able to balance school, student council stuff, and a part-time job on top of that. It is actually quite impressive. Usui is a great male lead for this story. He is such a good contrast to Misaki. She is very hardworking, but Usui never really has to work hard. He just kinda fucks around and finds out most of the time. He likes to mess with Misaki, and that makes for some of the best moments in this series. The rest of the cast is also decent. There are a lot of really good side characters in this series that all have great personalities and make for some really good moments, both comedic and emotional. Maid Sama is one of those series that no matter how many years pass, I think it will always hold up. It is just a good series to watch and especially read. This next series is a bit of a weird one in the sense that I don't know why I like it as much as I do. I just really like it. This series' name is Kimin To. This series has so much good about it. Firstly, we got a hype third season announced just recently. But that's not all. This series does a really good job at having its comedic moments in it while being mostly serious romance story. The comedic moments do wonders for this series as well. The serious stuff in this series is what I live for though. This series does such a good job at making you feel for the characters, which makes these moments hit way harder. The animation in this series is decent for the time and it still looks okay today. But that's fine, honestly, as we are getting a new season so it'll probably look a lot better now. The characters in this are so good as well. Sawako is a great main character. Unlike the past few series I've talked about, Sawako is a very shy person who struggles to open up to people. Shoujo is the popular guy who helps Sawako open up and make friends throughout the series. He has his fair share of problems as well, but that is what makes his character so good. The side cast is great as well in this series. There are so many good characters. Sawako's friends especially are good as they immediately take to her and they really are good people who just care about her. There is an antagonist character in the series in which she does a really good job at playing that role. You really end up hating her for a large portion of the series. The character writing in the series is just so good. Kimin To is a really good series, and if you haven't watched it, now is as good a time as any with the new season coming out soon. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Alright, let's jump right into this one as I don't think this series will be much of a surprise to anyone. The series is Yona of the Dawn. I like to call this series the One Piece of Shoujo, as this is one of the longest and most ambitious shoujo series I know of. This series is great for many reasons, but the first one I want to talk about is its world building. The world building in the series is insanely good. We get to actually explore the world of Yona the Dawn alongside the characters. We also get to learn the history and many other things that make the world feel alive in this series, which isn't something that is easy to pull off. The animation in this series still looks so good. This series is a decade old now, and it is still better looking than some of the anime that come out today. The soundtrack for the series is also really good. There are a lot of good music on the soundtrack that they utilize it well. But, as per usual, the best part of the series is the characters, especially Yona herself. She is actually my favorite character not only in this series, but out of all the characters on this list. Her development throughout the series is insane, and the anime doesn't even cover all of it. She is almost an entirely different person from who she was at the beginning of the series. But the other characters are pretty good as well. Hawk make for a really good male lead in the story. He's been around Yona for a very long time and has seen her grow into an amazing leader. He is strong and knows what he wants. The other dragon warriors have really cool personalities that make them fairly interesting characters, each with their own backstories and reason for following Yona. And outside of them, the series also has a really good antagonist. Someone who Yona once trusted and even loved, who betrayed her, and now she wants nothing to do with him. Honestly, this series just does literally everything right. I love this series so much because of how good it is. Alright, there's no need to hold back. The Fruits Basket Remake is my favorite shoujo anime. This series is just so damn good all the way from episode 1 to the very end. The series has some comedic moments in it, but it is mostly a drama series that takes itself very seriously. The comedy in this series is pretty damn funny though. They really know how to balance it out. The emotional stuff is really what makes this series so good though. This shit damn near made me cry in every single episode. There's just something about this series that hits different. This series is so well animated as well, like holy shit is it so good. There was no reason to make it look as good as it does, but I am not complaining because it just made the anime so much better to watch. And the soundtrack, holy hell the soundtrack, it is so damn good. All the openings are amazing, plus there are so many good emotional tracks on the soundtrack that just hit so hard. This remake was just amazing as all hell and made for such an incredible series. The characters as well are so good. Toru is the perfect main character for the series. She's extremely kind and naive. She helps everybody out with their trauma while holding her own trauma in. She struggles with opening up to people in this series and instead just puts on a front. But as the series progresses, she grows to be such a strong and mature character, which is insane. Kyo is actually such a good male lead for the story. He starts off as very aggressive, but as you learn his backstory, you learn the reason why that is. He stays aggressive throughout the series, however, he does start to open up to people a lot more as the series goes on, especially Toru, who he really opens up to. Yuki is another great male lead in this story. He doesn't get as much focus after season 1 as the series starts progressing the romance and trauma of the other characters. But he is the typical princely character, which is actually just a front and a mask for all of his trauma that he has. He hides his past from others, never truly opening up until he meets Toru, where he then starts opening up a lot and becomes a pretty good person by the end of the series. Him and Kyo don't really get along in this series unless they are trying to protect Toru, in which case they agree, except for how to go about it. The other Zodiac characters are so good. We get to spend so much time with each and every one of them, learning their backstory, seeing their struggles and growth. It makes you really love all the characters. Toru's close friends also get a lot of screen time and development in this series, which also makes for some really good moments in this series. Fruits Basket is such an incredible series. It is hyper emotional with godlike characters that make this whole series amazing. This is one of the best shoujo anime bar none, and I don't think another series will beat it anytime soon. So that is my list. You can give me your thoughts on it down in the comments below, and leave your list down there as well. I would love to see them. Shoujo anime is a demographic of anime that I really like a lot. It was hard for me to put some of these series over some other series that aren't on the list because there are just so many series that I really like in this demographic, but this ended up being my final list, and each of these series is amazing in their own right.